Welcome to 28.5 Women's Basketball, where we explore a unique and authentic perspective on the women's game, break down upcoming matchups, and discuss the latest news and trends in women's basketball. We are your hosts. I'm Sydney Story, and I played basketball at the University of Tennessee under Pat Summitt.
And I'm Becca Goodman, and I played at the University of Notre Dame under Muffet McGraw. And we're thrilled to have you join us today. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy what you hear, be sure to tune in each week and don't forget to follow, download, and listen to give an assist and share the love. Now let's get started with today's episode. Hey Sid, what's up? Can you believe we're in March? It is already March.
It's like a bittersweet thing because the season's been so much fun and it's been an awesome season. But March is upon us and conference tournaments are here, and those are a lot of fun too. Postseason brings a different thrill to the game. And I think back to playing in those conference tournaments and the grind that they are. Do you remember those?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely nuts knowing you can only take it one game at a time, and you kind of have an idea of who could be there or what the next game could be, but it's just like March Madness. It doesn't matter unless you win the game, right?
Yeah, it's definitely postseason. It definitely has that feel to it, turning on the TV and watching those games. Almost like that do or die mentality. Because if you don't show up and play your game, you're going to get knocked out here in postseason. So it's definitely a fun time.
And I just think this season has been so wild with the amount of upsets and expectations and the amount of number one seeds that we've had. It's really been, like, I think the best word for it is it's been wild. We have some stats that we're going to talk about here in the second quarter about what and how the game has grown. But I mean, so many great teams. And if you're not consistent or you're not aware and locked in every game and almost every possession at this point, right? Because it's do or die. Teams are taking what they can. It's just getting wild, Sid.
It really is. It's going to be a fun episode today. I'm excited.
All right. So jumping in that first quarter, we're going to talk about some upsets from the last week of the regular season. Important games that teams either had to win for seeds for the conference tournament, and then kind of just talking through what all happened with those. Second quarter, we're going to do some in the news. We're kind of going to bounce around a little bit. Third quarter, we have some upsets already from some conference tournaments. Fourth quarter, we're going to highlight some of the Power Four conference awards. Every year, there's between 4 to 6 awards that each conference gives out. So we're just going to chat through a couple of those, and then we have a quick overtime where we're going to highlight some of the remaining conference tournament schedule games for you to listen to and watch tonight and this weekend.
Let's dig in. Let's do it. Quarter number 1. So upsets from last week's regular season. And you alluded to it, Becca. This season has just been wild. And also that you need to really close out your conference play. And we saw a few teams last weekend not do that, not do a great job of that. So pretty interesting. I want to start with number 4, USC beating number 2, UCLA yet again. Score of 80-67. Juju dropped 30 points. I mean, she just owned both of these matchups in conference play this year against UCLA. And it was a fun game to watch. And it's worth noting that UCLA's only 2 losses so far this season have been to USC. USC really had their number.
I was just you took the words out of my mouth. They had their number. They doubled on Lauren Betts. They made it a game. And I just feel like their scout on them was probably one of the best. A lot of teams could take note of that for sure going forward. They played them great.
To be able to win that one on the road and at home, pretty cool there for USC this year. Our second upset that we wanted to highlight, Georgia beat number 11 Tennessee by a score of 72-69. This one's rough for me, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later in the episode. Tennessee dropped another one. So showing some of that fatigue here a little bit later in the season, showing that some teams are starting to peak at the right time, and maybe Tennessee hasn't been able to do that. So an interesting one there. Always a rough story here when I've got to report that the Lady Vols lose one there. And to Georgia, I used to not like playing against Georgia. I just feel like they come out really swinging against Tennessee. And in this case, we're able to knock the Lady Vols off there. The other one here, the Ole Miss Rebels were able to beat number 7 LSU. To me, this was a huge upset. LSU really has played fairly consistent all year. And obviously, I'm just going to throw this out here. They have an injury right now. Flage is out right now through this game and then through the conference tournament here. So I think that's really hurting LSU. But Ole Miss, we have been talking about them all season. They came out swinging in this game and really took down the LSU Lady Tigers there by a score of 85-77. What's your thoughts on this? Because I know we're both Coach Yo fans over on the Ole Miss side.
Yeah, I think they have a younger team. Madison Scott's one of their main vets that they rely on heavily, and she's been showing up more consistently as of lately. But I think maybe the team as a whole is just buying into the style. I think Coach Yo has high expectations, and maybe early on in the season they weren't meeting those because they weren't playing the style that she wanted to. So I just think this is a huge confidence boost for them. LSU's kind of been floating under the radar, but I'm giving them props. They're winning games. They have a great record, and they're obviously a top 10 team. But I just think for Ole Miss, this is a huge confidence boost going into the conference tourney and then the NCAA tourney.
Absolutely. A solid win in the SEC for them there. Virginia beat number 8 UNC by a score of 78-75. Number 19, Maryland beat number 12, Ohio State by a score of 93-90. This one went to overtime. In the finish of this one, the last 5 seconds of this game were insane. Did you catch it, Becca?
I did not.
Oh, man. Ohio State girl comes down. She's driving the lane. She falls down, dribbling the ball, keeps her dribble, is able to go in and score the layup. And then Maryland comes down at the other end at the buzzer and throws up a Hail Mary 3 and drains it to go up and
deep?
win in overtime.
Was it a deep 3?
It was pretty deep. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm sure, there's clips galore on social media. I'm sure you'll be able to pull it right up, but it was kind of that crazy March Madness feel of a finish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And again, two really good teams. Like we've talked about Maryland and Brenda Freeze and what she can bring from the coaching side, and they've got some talent there. Some injuries in and out of the season that's hurt Maryland quite a bit. And then Ohio State has been one of those teams that's been fairly consistent throughout the entire year. Both those teams right now, I think, are going to be fun to continue to watch here in Big Ten, in the Big Ten Conference tourney going on. So really was a crazy weekend of upsets. And we've seen that consistently throughout the season where there will be a weekend or a few days in a row where it's upset city. And that certainly was the case last weekend if you were tuning in to women's basketball.
Yeah, I do want to highlight, it's not on here, but Notre Dame also lost. We had talked about how they lost to NC State in double overtime, but 4 days later, then they fell to Florida State at home by 5. So again, super important to finish out the regular season. Then that loss gave them a conference share with NC State. So NC State was the number 1 seed in the ACC tournament, and Notre Dame was the 2nd seed. So it was nice that they bounced back against Louisville, but just wanted to mention because I didn't want, people think we're biased and we're not sharing the good and the bad, right?
Maybe it gives Notre Dame a little motivation, a little chip on their shoulder heading in. We'll see how they respond.
I hope it's a big chip at this point.
Yeah.
So let's jump into our second quarter. We're going to do a little bit of in the news. This is a bit of a round robin. I love when there's basketball, women's basketball specifically, being talked about and mentioned in different facets, right? So how interesting is this that the GOAT of tennis, Serena Williams, is joining the ownership group of the Toronto Tempo, the new WNBA's expansion team in Canada. Now, her announcement for this was a video of her bouncing a ball in a tennis court. And then it flips to her in like a business suit, but it had like her tennis skirt and a basketball. So I don't know if it was a little bit of a power move, right? Like I think it is, honestly. And she's legit as all heck, right? Serena Williams. But for her to invest in the women's WNBA, I think just is a huge confidence in where the women's game is going. What'd you think about it, Sid?
I was excited to see it. It's that whole thing, women empowering women. And that, to me, speaks to some of that. I also just think about the overall brand that Serena Williams brings to anything, let alone to the WNBA. Like, that's such a cool thing for the WNBA. She's going to be sitting courtside. She's going to be a part of the mix there. And I think that's really cool for our game and the future of our game. I hope more celebrities and big time athletes like this continue to invest. It's just good for everybody all around.
Yeah. I hope we start getting more NBA players to invest. I've heard rumors and rustling about like Cleveland having a WNBA team or something like that. But how cool would it be if LeBron, right? Somebody who has a lot of money, just chose to invest and be part owner in something like that. I think it would show a lot of good faith and obviously just a lot of overall understanding of, hey, if we have to grow the game, we also have to put into it, but put into it from another league that is kind of known as the one that feeds the WNBA, right? It makes it run. But as of lately, there's been so much going on. I think it speaks for itself at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these cities, I was in Cleveland last year for the Final Four, and Nashville's one that they're talking about with the summit and naming it after Coach Summit. And Candace is involved, and Peyton Manning, and
Hmm.
a lot of celebrities there. It's just really cool to see some of these cities stepping up also. I think they can bring that fan base, and to see it expand the way it probably is here is just awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And just talking about the WNBA, for a long time they've highlighted that there's only 12 spots per team, right? So every year you get drafted, there's a huge draft, right? There's many rounds, there's 36 to 48, but a lot of times those girls don't make the team because you have vets like Sue Bird before she retired, Diana Taurasi before she retired, Brittany Griner, Skylar Digg, all these people who are not retiring because they have the longevity of playing so long in the league that these girls get drafted, go to a training camp, which is great exposure. It's great for your resume. I would have died to have that while I played overseas because you instantly just get into a better overseas situation. It's like the WNBA over there to a degree. So, speaking of women's basketball and it just growing, let's jump to our next subject here and talk about the post Clark era, right? Obviously, we're in season 1 since Caitlin Clark has left and she's now in the WNBA. But this season, ESPN has had 15 women's college basketball games with over 500,000 plus viewers. That's already 2 more than last year. And last year was Caitlin Clark era where she was getting that plus some just on her Iowa schedules, right? So with only a few games left or remaining in women's college basketball, ESPN is already up plus 3% versus last year and plus 44% from 2 seasons ago. So before Caitlin Clark, we were at the low, and Caitlin Clark grew that obviously, made women's basketball more attractive. I'm going to give Angel Reese her flowers here and Haley Van Lith, right? LSU had a great team rocking and rolling there. Grew that. But then from last year to this year, we're up 3% in just viewership. I think it just highlights that the women's game is real. It's here. It's going to stay. And it's something you want to watch and be a part of. And that just creates more opportunities, whether it's NIL, whether it's now you see it at the next level with the WNBA expanding, people buying in there and trying to grow the game. I think it's an amazing time in 2025 to be a part of or anything with women's basketball.
I think you make a really good point. I think it allows it to grow in a not just a one-dimensional way where you turn on the TV and you watch those players, but you're immersed in the culture. And I think NIL is huge with this. I mean, now you're seeing Affleck commercials with the starting five of Notre Dame in the commercial.
Yeah. Yep.
Notre Dame women's basketball team is on an Affleck commercial. Like it's just,
And they didn't even have to say a word. There was no
yeah,
word said. It was just like reaction. I was like, dang, that's a nice, easy check.
right, right. And now they're talking about putting them on one of the PlayStation games. You're gonna see
Yep.
Notre Dame doing that. I mean, it's just growing like gangbusters. And if you pay attention to it, people are saying that like, here's the value of it. This is the reality, and to see it come into fruition a little bit is really cool. And just to see it maintain and even grow even more since Caitlin Clark speaks to the
Hmm.
fact that it's entertaining, people are into it. And honestly, like and you and I watch women's games like crazy, so this is totally biased, but there are a lot of households right now. If you walk in and you say, "Can you name a men's basketball player in the NCAA right now?" You might get like flag, you might get a couple names, but I guarantee that there are a lot of households where they're going to name some women players right now, and it just speaks to the overall marketability of women. And I think that's a big thing right now that needs to be touched on even more. Is we're marketable,
Yeah.
which is pretty
Without a
cool.
doubt. I think it's hilarious that you say that because I think if you asked me that, I don't know if I could name any men's basketball players in college. Like, honestly, I used to watch men's basketball quite a bit and then dabble with women's basketball, right? The good games. But at that point, you knew powerhouses were just going to win games. Absolutely, obviously, playing in college, you get a better understanding of what games are a bit better, which ones are going to be competitive. But I would just say within the last 3 years, I don't really know if I could name. I mean, Purdue, IU, Notre Dame men's basketball. You watch it and you're aware of it, but yeah, I think I'm one of those households where I don't know if I could name one. I could name a whole starting five though on some women's college teams, which is I think the point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we watch so many games on the women's side. It's not even fair. But Cooper Flagg is the guy that I was thinking of for Duke, right? I think he's one of the best players in the NCAA and a freshman at that. So I think he's gotten a lot of hype. But I don't know. You hear a lot about the women. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's jump to our last segment of In the News. Sid, I wanted to specifically ask you this, and I think we've already touched on it, you and I previously, but folks, the SEC did a coin flip to see who would be the number one seed going into the SEC tournament. A man literally flipped a coin on TV. One side was South Carolina, one side was Texas, and that was who was the number one seed for the SEC tournament. So Texas comes in on the 2, South Carolina's at the 1. And the worst part was, and I thought this was so weird in general just to watch it. I don't know if I've never seen this before, but like the Texas girls basketball team was watching it live, like right after a game, and was so hype when they were like, we got this, we got this. And then it went to South Carolina and they were like, South Carolina, and they were like, dang. And it was just like instantly deflating. And I'm sitting here like, isn't there another way to decide this as opposed to a coin flip?
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't remember this when I played. I don't know if there's more teams now that they've added a few teams since certainly I was there. I don't like it at all. I think it comes down to Texas and South Carolina. They split their games. They split the SEC regular season conference, and they do this coin flip. But really, it should have been on merit to me. Is there a way to say, okay, total points scored in the conference or total points scored against each other if whatever the team is that you split with? Like I just think there is a better way. I don't know. It's sports. Like it's like the tie in the NFL. When there's a tie in an NFL game, I'm like, what is this? Right? It reminded me of that almost.
Yeah, or even if they did something where it was like average margin of victory throughout the whole conference play, because I think then you'd get more competitive games throughout the season or dominance thereof, just understanding that could be a potential outcome if there is a tie towards the end.
Yeah, I'm with you. Anything to me that's merit based is probably going to be better than this coin flip. So,
yeah.
And maybe they change it. I'm sure they're getting a lot of feedback on it. They can change the rules coming up here, and maybe they will. It's interesting.
They're like, this isn't for possession. This is like, what side do you want to score on? No, this is for the number one seed. So, no, I get it. I just saw it. I thought it was wild. So I don't know if anybody else saw it and thought the same thing, but let's all give them some better feedback going forward.
Yeah, for real. All right, let's jump into the third quarter here. Shifting to those conference tournaments, we wanted to highlight a couple upsets that have happened already. So the first one we've got here, at really the end of an era, Stanford falls to Clemson 46-63. Before I keep going here, I'm just going to go back to that score, 46-63. Stanford, who traditionally brings in a ton of good recruits and just overall basketball machines, scores 46 points in a conference tournament game. I don't think I've ever seen it. I'm not going to say it's never happened. I'd have to look it up, but that's a pretty low scoring game. And for them to just not be able to put together some offense and compete against Clemson, that's a real bummer. So they lose in the first round of the ACC tournament and is set up to miss out on the NCAA tourney, like the overall NCAA tournament. Stanford will not be in it. The first time since 1987, before we were born, Becca. Crazy. Insane. We've never not known Stanford in the tournament. So that's a real bummer. And we talked a lot about it at the beginning of the season. Kate Pay coming in, stepping in for Tara Vanderveer as she retired. She's one of the GOATs in the game as a coach. So it's a big job to fill. And Kate Pay had been her right-hand woman for years. I'm not saying she's not good for the role and going to be able to turn things around, but not a good first year out of the gate. So little disappointing to see that. We want to see some of these blue bloods continue, and then we want to see those other teams filter in and just make it an overall competitive sport for us. And I think when you look at the West Coast, Stanford definitely is one of those teams that really brings it. So their first year in the ACC, doing a lot of that traveling, I think that's got to have weighed on them maybe a little bit. I don't want to make excuses here, but that's a tough loss for them, and then really puts them out of the tournament here. So kind of a bummer. It snaps a streak of 36 consecutive appearances, which was the second longest streak in NCAA tournament history behind University of Tennessee's 42. So, man, bummer to see it.
Yeah, I think change of coaches plus, Kiki Iriafen going to USC. She was one of their go-to players. The player probably would have been the player going forward. Just a lot of changes, trying to find their identity, and I think Kate Pay trying to, the NIL makes this messy, right? Makes it maybe you have younger players, you have a losing season, but you have to balance how you react to this and your players, because you don't want them to all just hit the transfer portal and take off, and then you're in a worse spot than you already were. So I think it's always interesting to see, and I fully expect Stanford to bounce back. They're a great school. Who wouldn't want to go there and be able to play ball? So, but
absolutely.
Tough, definitely tough.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too. So I lived some of this history. I played all 4 years for Pat, and then she went one more season and then ultimately retired. And really, we saw some of a dip there. I'm just being honest, right? Like, how do you fill the shoes of Pat Summitt? That's a huge void there. And so you saw the program kind of dip, and we've kind of been spiraling and not really the same team with the same strength since. And I hope we're not seeing that with Stanford. I hope we're not seeing it with Iowa. Like Lisa Bluter stepping down last year, and Jan Jensen coming in is kind of a similar story. So those are three programs. You saw Tennessee kind of slip once Pat leaves. We're seeing it a little bit once Tara's gone. We've seen it a little bit with Iowa, and Iowa's a little bit of a different story. I mean, they lost such great talent last year, but you did see Iowa slip a little bit. So hopefully Stanford, Iowa can turn it around. I will give kudos to Notre Dame. Muffet McGraw retires, and Niele Ivey has kept that thing afloat. Notre Dame is just as relevant as they were before, and I think that's a shout out to Niele, because we haven't really seen that big of a dip with Notre Dame.
Yeah, no, Niele is known as the ultimate recruiter. She was the main reason. I think her first assignment on campus was to get Skylar, and that turned out pretty well. So I think she's a player's coach. So I think the expectation and how she coaches, that's what really what keeps the talent there, which, Notre Dame, not the best of weather, right? There's pros and cons to every school, but yeah, it's great to see for sure Notre Dame staying relevant and being consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good for the game. Like Notre Dame,
yeah,
when they're playing well and you've got some of the other teams that are hanging around, it's fun to watch. It's entertaining, right? So especially the fan base that a lot of these programs have. So hopefully we'll see some of that turnaround next year. We'll see. The second upset from conference tournaments we want to call out is the Tennessee Lady Vols losing to Vandy. We lose to Vandy for the second time this season. It's heartening for me. It's that in-state rivalry, and we just don't want to lose to Vandy, and we did it twice this season. And losing in the conference tournament, it weighs on you a little bit more like that. So we were knocked out in the second round of the SEC tournament with a score of 76-84. And really, if you tuned into this one, Vandy had the upper hand for at least 3 of the 4 quarters. So Vandy has pulled off the upset on Tennessee twice this season, and the first time in series history. So there it is. That's unfortunate. We'll see how we bounce back in the tournament here, but we really have kind of shot ourselves in the foot here with some of these losses late in the season. That's going to hurt us from a seeding standpoint for sure heading into the tournament. So it's a bummer there for the Lady Vols.
Yeah, for sure. I don't really have a lot to say about this one. It stinks to see good teams that I know we've talked about all season long. Obviously, Tennessee's one of those. They have a different style that we've talked about often. So you just worry, and you always think, and I'm sure the coaching staff's spinning as well, as to, how do you add a little more while doing what you've taught and being consistent, and maybe just stick with it and write it out into the tourney and just see how it goes. But Definitely, it feels like they've been off a little bit. I think every team has gone through that at this point in the season. And as we've mentioned, it's a grind. Notre Dame's lost, UCLA's lost, Tennessee's lost, LSU. I mean, we could go on and on. This year has been wild. I'll go back to when we first started this episode. It's just been wild. That's all I can really say.
Yeah, and it's the love-hate I have for the Lady Vols right now, and obviously I'm going to back them till I die, Lady Vols for life. But I love the high of the high when we're showing up and beating UConn and the game, that style that we're playing is paying off. That up-tempo, hockey-style sub, live and die by the three ball. Let's have 20 plus more possessions than the other team. And when we win, it feels good. But when we lose playing that style, I don't know. It's like extra salt in the wound for me for some reason. So I'm just hoping, and I don't want to look past the tournament. I hope we can make a deep run here. But really, when we get those recruits in that we're going to get heading into next year, like we got to hit the ground running. We got to play more consistent 40-minute basketball. You have to at this point. The game is so competitive. You can't take quarters off, possessions off. And I think there are times when I'm watching us and it's just not the Tennessee basketball that it's capable of being. So I'm hoping that it's a lot of learning and we can power through and turn it around here. But we'll see.
All right, so jumping into our fourth quarter, we're going to go through the big Power Four conference, their awards. So every conference gives, it's between 4 to 6 awards. We're just going to highlight the big four that every conference does. The first one is Player of the Year, second is Defensive Player of the Year, third is Freshman of the Year, and then the fourth is Coach of the Year. So jumping into that first conference, the ACC, we have Player of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year as Hannah Hidalgo from Notre Dame. I think rightfully so. She showed up on both ends of the floor. Freshman of the Year is Toby Fournier from Duke. And then the Coach of the Year is Wes Moore from NC State. I absolutely think the NC State Coach of the Year is rightfully so. I think at the beginning of the season, they've had some losses, and we kind of wrote them off, right? They were a Final Four team last year, were seeded high at the beginning, had some ups and downs, had some losses. And I mean, they're playing, I think, the strongest basketball that they've played all season, which is what you want, to peak at the right time. So rightfully so. Sid, do you have any thoughts? What do you think of these awards, and anyone you would have added?
I think they're pretty much dead on. Hannah Hidalgo is just phenomenal. She's one of the best players in the country, and her defense is insane. So I think it makes a lot of sense that she won the Player of the Year and the Defensive Player of the Year. Toby Fournier, we had talked about her from the very beginning. Yep. She was a highly touted freshman coming in, had her pick at whatever school she probably wanted to go to, goes to Duke, goes to play for Kara Lawson, and really stepped up, especially in ACC play. I think early on in the season, she was going through those freshman woes a little bit maybe, and we talk about that a ton, how your freshman year is so hard. But when it came to ACC play, Toby stepped up. I think it was hands down that she was probably going to get this award and got it. So that was pretty cool to see.
Couldn't agree more. Jumping to the Big Ten, right? Going through those same four. Player of the Year, Juju Watkins. Defensive Player of the Year, Lauren Betts from UCLA. We have a co-freshman of the year with Cambridge from Ohio State and Olsen from Michigan. And then Coach of the Year is Lindsay Gottlieb from USC. The Big Ten obviously has a lot of people to pull from, but I just think they're heavy on the USC UCLA side with these awards because I mean they're powerhouses. They're the best of the best, not only in the Big Ten, but also in college basketball, right? So great to see a co-freshman of the year, I think rightfully so. But what are your thoughts?
I look at this list in the Big Ten specifically and the schools that are a part of this. So you've got USC, UCLA, Ohio State, Michigan. I wonder if any of those schools were a part of these awards last year. It's just interesting to see how much the Big Ten has turned over, but maintained as such a powerful conference this year. Maybe Ohio State, right? They were really good last year too. But certainly, obviously, USC and UCLA weren't on there, and then probably not Michigan either. So kudos to these schools. And I think all of these teams, and specifically, obviously, USC and UCLA had really good seasons. And we talk a ton about Olsen for Michigan and the freshman class for Michigan in general, and how Michigan has a bright future if they stay through the portal. That's pretty cool. And shout out to Lindsay Gottlieb, because her beating UCLA twice, I think, was amazing and really entertaining to watch. And I think Lauren Betts, it's tough for her because most of the season, most of the regular season, she was up there for player of the year. And at that point was probably hands down going to get it for the Big Ten. It's tough with Juju, obviously. We've known Juju's very capable of getting this. But the way Juju showed up late in the season here, beating UCLA twice, really, I think, flipped the script there a little bit and made it obvious that Juju should have won player of the year in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree with you fully. I think USC beating UCLA twice. Not I mean, you have Texas, South Carolina. That's another big powerhouse, but they at least went 1-1. So, UCLA's got to be feeling some type of way that USC is their only loss. Their only loss all year long and twice.
Yeah. Yep. Good stuff.
Yeah. Speaking of good stuff, let's jump into that SEC conference where it's a powerhouse of players. So, player of the year is Madison Booker from Texas. Defensive player of the year is Clara Strack from Kentucky. Freshman of the year is Michaela Blakes from Vandy. And coach of the year is Vic Schaefer from Texas. I am pretty excited for Michaela Blakes and Clara Strack because I just don't think you've ever really seen teams like Kentucky and Vandy, as you said, with the Big Ten, kind of having these players with standout performances enough to get an award, right? This isn't just a one game type thing. This is voted on by conference. These are all the coaches, right? So it's absolutely awesome to see. I think the routine or the flow of these conferences, player of the year and coach of the year, kind of all matches up in my mind. But it's that defensive player of the year and the freshman of the year that I think is pretty amazing. But what did you think about the SEC awards?
Madison Booker is so good. I was excited to see that she won player of the year. I think every team that played her probably had to really reevaluate their scouting, really think through defensively what they were going to do to stop her. Her mid-range game is the best in the country, bar none. I think it's interesting, and I'm curious. To me, when we watched a lot of SEC games this year, I love Morrow so much from LSU. She had to have been a contender in this, but like she is so good. She is a double machine. And not that I'm not taking anything away from Booker. Booker is phenomenal. But I was like, also, to me, it came down to those two. I think Morrow had to have been a close second there for player of the year.
I think it's hilarious that, we divide and conquer what we want to talk about in these episodes. And that was one thing after we said those, I wanted to get your input. The one most controversial, like everybody's blowing it up, is player of the year for the SEC, and it should have been Morrow. Like everybody's saying, I don't know how Anissa didn't get this. I don't know how. Like, so that's just wild that, again, taking nothing from Booker, taking nothing.
Right. She's good, yo.
Yeah. Anissa Morrow was definitely, as a 6'1" post player guard, everything, and to average a double-double in SEC play. Like, why? That's nuts. That's absolutely crazy. I don't know how she is it in something and highlighted in some way, for sure. I agree with you.
I think Morrow was maybe a little bit more consistent in every game. Whereas Booker, we saw her struggle a little bit in a couple of games. So that's an interesting one. And that struggle, I mean, she's still capable of scoring 15 plus points on her off nights, but Morrow just didn't really struggle like that to me in SEC play.
Yeah, Booker had some rough shooting nights against Maryland and South Carolina for sure. Those were two of the rough, I think the roughest games we've seen this season that had a lot of hype around them.
Yeah, and Blake's for Vandy. She's one of the best. If they do a freshman of the year across the country, which they probably do, hands down, she should get it. Yeah. I mean, she's a scoring machine, and that's going to be really fun for Vandy. I think if they can keep her with the transfer portal, if Shea Ralph can build a team, continue to build a team around her, and you see it on social media, right? They're investing. They're getting investors right now in their practice facilities and really building that program up from the tangibles and the intangibles. Man, Vandy might be one of those teams that gets better and better if Blake stays, honestly.
Yeah, completely agree with you. Let's jump over to the Big 12 now. Again, we're going to have two, which are kind of assumed, and then two, which again are the defensive player and freshman of the year that are a bit new, which is great. I think this is absolutely great for the game to see it not only come from upsets throughout the year, but now players and women getting acknowledged for their play throughout the year. So For Big 12 Player of the Year, Haley Van Lith. Defensive Player of the Year is J.J. Cornley from West Virginia. Freshman of the Year is Delaney Gibb from BYU. And then Coach of the Year is Mark Campbell from TCU. So again, Haley Van Lith and Mark Campbell, they've done a lot of work, got a lot of recruits in. Great to see them on the board in general, but kind of assumed. I think it's amazing that West Virginia and BYU have girls that have made a mark and got this award. I think it's huge. I don't know when another time I would have ever seen maybe someone from West Virginia. They had a lot of great players when we were in the Big East, but BYU getting on the board. Okay, Gibb.
Yeah, solid call out there. And I think TCU is such a fun story here. If we think back to last year, their roster got so small with injuries. They got down, I don't know how many players it was, but a small amount of players where they had to hold open tryouts on campus to bring in more girls to finish the season.
That's crazy.
And so it's crazy. You think about the turnaround Mark Campbell did for that program. He goes out, hits the portal, gets Haley Van Lith, Sedona Prince, right? Those two players are two of the best players in the country. He gets them to come in and then really just has a great season in the Big 12. That's a cool story, I think, this year in women's basketball for sure.
Definitely. Couldn't agree more.
All right, Becca, we've got our overtime. Let's hit it. So the remaining conference tournament schedule. So today's Friday for those listening on the episode drop, and we are in the thick of that conference tournament. So we're in the quarterfinals today. So if you turn on TV from ESPN to the Big Ten Network, games are on, right? So there's a lot of women's basketball throughout the day. In those quarterfinals for all the main conferences, there are 4 games today. So a lot of good basketball on. Saturday, there's the semifinals. So there's 2 games for every conference on Saturday. The championship day is Sunday for the SEC, ACC, Big Ten. The Big East, ironically, their championship's on Monday. So they have a little bit of a different schedule than everybody else. But these other conferences, we're going to highlight the SEC, ACC, and Big Ten. That's kind of the flow that they're following this weekend. So let's jump to the SEC. The SEC conference tournament is happening in Greenville, South Carolina. Again, the quarterfinals today are happening. 2 games that I think are going to be really cool and fun to tune into. One being the noon Eastern game, South Carolina versus Vandy. What's your thoughts on that one, Becca?
I fully expect South Carolina to come out and take care of business here. I think Vandy is for sure on a high, beating Tennessee. But what a tough road that they're going to have. Tennessee, then South Carolina, and then it only gets harder after that. So I think South Carolina is going to take care of business in this one.
Yeah, I think they're on a mission. I think they've taken some bumps and bruises throughout the season, and I think this is where Dawn shines. So I think she's going to probably look to make a run here with her team, but we'll see. You never know. Score 0-0 right
absolutely.
now. So there it is. And then Kentucky versus Oklahoma. This is one that I'm really looking forward to today because I think both teams are playing particularly well right now. And it's fun to watch Georgia Amore. She's one of the best point guards out there. It's fun to watch Oklahoma. They have a high octane offense, very up and down and fun to watch. So I think this one's going to be a good one to tune in also for the SEC. Let's jump into the ACC. That's happening right now in Greensboro, North Carolina for their tournament. Again, the quarterfinals today. A couple games that are also worth tuning into. Florida State versus North Carolina and NC State versus Georgia Tech. Any of those games stick out to you, Beck?
Yeah, I think the Florida State North Carolina game is going to be a good one. Florida State has a lot of confidence. They just beat Notre Dame and headed into the tournament. North Carolina kind of was struggling towards the end of regular season. Utsby was out, but she's very much back. I just saw her. They won, and then she had an interview after, and they were just so shocked at how well in condition she was. And her athletic trainer was saying that she was actually in better shape while she was training to rehab her injury to get back. So I think getting her back in, it might be a little bit of, round circle, square peg, trying to just, force the issue. But I think they're flowing and getting some good offensive minutes from a lot of other people. So Utsby can kind of just fill in how she normally does. So I think it's going to be a good game. Florida State, they also have some great players, but I'm gonna roll with North Carolina.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know. These are tough. I just think it's a toss-up. I think because we are so late in the season here and you're playing some of these back-to-back games, and as the weekend progresses, legs are a factor and health is a factor because you're playing so many minutes. It's hard to play these 40-minute games day after day after day without a day in between. Like, it's nuts. I don't know. I think Florida State's going to be able to hang with North Carolina, but I also think North Carolina probably has an edge. And then I think NC State, I would love it if they keep winning and we get to see that rematch maybe of NC State versus Notre Dame. That'd be pretty cool. So we'll see what happens there. All right, let's jump to the Big Ten. And this one is happening in Indianapolis, Indiana, our Indiana stomping grounds, Becca.
We should go.
I know we should go. We were just there
Let's
last
just
weekend.
head down there.
Shout out to Becca, who did the 3A girls basketball state championship. You were commentating on the sidelines, which is super cool, calling the game there. So that's awesome to be at the state championships for the high school level this year. And I think that Indianapolis is such a cool sports city to host these tournaments. So that's great that the Big Ten has that, and it's obvious why they choose Indy, I think, year in and year out.
Did you hear that they're hosting the WNBA All-Star Game next year?
Ooh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it just continues. Keep growing and going. Okay, Indy.
Okay. So the quarterfinals again happening today. Indiana versus USC. I think that's going to be a good one. Michigan versus Maryland. I think that's also going to be a good one. So again, a ton of good games to tune into today, tomorrow, and into Championship Sunday. And then for the Big East, it'll be on Monday there. So a lot of cool basketball going on, and we are in postseason. So it'll be interesting to see who comes out on top after this weekend.
Yeah, it's kind of do or die right now, right? For a lot of teams, it's either you keep playing and make your case to get an NCAA bid or a higher bid. And again, these aren't just these big conferences that we're talking about. This is around the nation, right? So once a tournament comes out and we get those brackets, we'll be highlighting who won the conferences and who kind of can make a run here and be an upset. So it's an exciting time. And I'm excited to watch these games this weekend and see where we're at for next week.
Absolutely. Great talking to you, Beck. Thanks for listening, everyone. Just a reminder to hit us up. We'll maybe do another team huddle or two before the end of season. We'll see. We're getting towards the end of the women's basketball NCAA season, but hit us up on our socials. We like to hear those questions and field those anyways. So just a reminder to do that.
Yep, sounds great. I can't wait for us to debrief on some of these games and see where we're at. Don't forget, we also have our Printify store if you'd like to get some gear. A lot of our family and friends have already purchased some, and it's been good stuff as of lately. I myself got a nice magnet, a bag, and some shirts. Got to sport the gear and support.
Yeah, the coffee mugs are pretty cool. So that's
they
kind of been a fan favorite. Yeah, good stuff. Awesome. Thanks, Beck. We'll talk to everyone soon.
All right. See you, Sid. That's the 28.5 final buzzer for today's episode. Don't forget to hit follow and download on your preferred podcast platform to catch every play-by-play. New episodes drop each week throughout the season.
If you've enjoyed our courtside chat, drop us a review or follow us on our social media accounts where you can send us questions that may be selected for our Team Huddle Q&A episodes. And remember, from females who have played the game, the size of the ball matters.